The first funerals for the victims in the Highland Park shooting began today. Services held for Jacqueline Sondheim, Steve Strauss, and a visitation for Nicholas Toledo Zaragoza. They were among 7 people shot and killed when that gunman opened fire from a rooftop at the Highland Park 4th of July parade on Monday. Meantime, earlier this week, we learned of a foiled 4th of July shooting plot, this time in Richmond, Virginia. NewsNation learning police received a tip leading to the arrest of 2 men, at least one of those men in the country illegally, and multiple guns were seized. Okay, we want to bring in our Rush Hour Roundtable now, where we will discuss all of this. So first, we want to introduce you to today's panel. We have Dina Sayegh-Dahl, attorney and legal analyst. Jason Rantz, host of the Jason Rantz Show on KTTH in Seattle. Megan Basham, reporter for The Daily Wire. And Dr. Laura McNeil, a legal analyst and professor of law, joining us on the roundtable for the first time. So our question for the panel, is any place safe anymore? Let's start with you, Megan.
I mean, it certainly doesn't feel like any sort of public event, a place that's going to draw crowds, that's going to draw attention. It feels like what we're seeing here is something of a viral epidemic. These people get attention. They seem to be seeking celebrity. They get that celebrity. Other people see that, and they also want to pursue that same celebrity. So we're seeing really a fairly terrible cycle here. And I know for me, I've looked at some public events this 4th of July. I looked at them and I kind of went, you know what? I think we're going to do something backyard with family. So that's what we did. And so we're having a really complicated discussion about how do we as the media cover these stories in a way that does not give these often evil, violent, sometimes very mentally ill people the kind of fame that they're looking for.
And that's a really good point. I want to get to that as well. Jason, what do you think? Is any place safe?
Yeah, lots of places are safe. I think obviously there is a emotional response when we see mass shootings. It's not just tragic, but it breaks our sense of comfort because it could technically happen anywhere. The truth of the matter is, because we talk about it so much in the media, it does make it seem as if it's happening more often than not. There's no doubt that we've seen an increase of gun violence in this country, especially over the last few years. That's what the data shows. But when we look specifically at this kind of gun violence, that represents about 1% of all the gun violence that we see. We generally see homicides, and they're either one-on-one or they're smaller in numbers in that very moment. That's where the issue is, at least for me, because I cover this a lot, I talk about and research this a lot. We have policies in place that have made it easier for criminals to stay out of jail, for better or for worse, policies that want us to believe that a lot of these people can just simply turn the corner with restorative justice programs. The unfortunate reality is they stay out on the streets and they recommit crime after crime after crime, and that's where I think the biggest threat actually lies.
All right, we have 2 lawyers on the panel here. Dr. Laura, Dina, either of you like to weigh in?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I agree that it does, based on the data, these types of shootings are unfortunately becoming our new norm, and they do represent a relatively small percentage, about 1%. But when you tell that to the families of, for instance, of Sandy Hook, the victims, 1% is one too many. One child's life is one too many. And so I think really what this new norm is doing is it's setting the stage for America to watch and see whether or not Congress can come together as one set democracy, united, and actually address this problem head on before we lose another life.
Well, Dina, you know, we just heard from Megan there at the start of this. Megan says that, you know, she and her family decided to just go ahead and celebrate the holiday in the backyard. And that was, you know, before we learned of this foiled plot, before all of the tragedy had unfolded in Highland Park. What do you think? Do you feel safe?
You know, I think to Megan's point, actually, about how, you know, the notoriety, what do we do about the press? How do we cover this? This is what they're looking for. I think a really interesting point about that Highland Park shooter is he thought about doing a second location in Madison, Wisconsin, and he decided not to because he hadn't scoped it out enough. That tells me that he was actually worried about him being killed in a moment, because you don't really need to scope out an event if you have an AR-15 and a whole bunch of defenseless people. I think it it really goes to that point that they are looking for fame. They also don't kill themselves after, like maybe we used to see long before with these types of shootings. And then to Lauren's point, we have been failing our children for decades. I mean, they are well versed in shooting drills, and the rest of us maybe are coming to terms with being subjected to this, yes, at parades or public events, but it's been decades since our very young children have been subjected to this kind of fear. And if we are all now waking up to how horrendous it is as an adult to face this, maybe we really can do something for our children who have been facing this for quite some time.
Well, I think it's important, though, to focus on actual solutions here, because ultimately, when we hear these kinds of events, we then turn to Congress and they talk about gun laws. I'm sorry, but what we're talking about in a lot of these cases, although not all, is a mental illness problem. And we have to talk about that and then come up with solutions, because ultimately we say, well, there's a mental health component, but let's go after the guns. Going after the guns means that someone who is at risk of being attacked, who is otherwise defenseless, can't then defend themselves. So we're making it harder for people to defend themselves when we all seem to acknowledge that we clearly are in an area right now, or at a point of time, in which our lives are less safe and less secure. So let's go after two things. Number one, the mental health aspect.
Going against guns, I mean, mental health, that's what laws do. Laws are there to set parameters in place, right? Laws are there to monitor behavior.
But what law do we need? What additional law? Because I think we've clearly seen instances in which we have laws on the books that are either failing because they don't go after the root cause of the issue, or they exist and they're not being followed. If we always say we need more and more laws.
Why is it an either-or issue? I mean, I think we can do it all. I mean, aren't we in this country where we believe anything is possible? Why can't we go after mental illness? Why can't we go after better gun measures? Why can't we go after better security at the school? Why can't we go after, informing people? I don't see it as
100%
you have to choose one or the other. I mean, these are our children, and we are developing adults that have been traumatized for years.
And desensitized in many cases.
We can put all of our resources into this.
Yeah. Yes. And I think, my point is, however, no one on the left seems to address the fact that we can do both. They focus exclusively on the guns.
And that's the problem.
And I think to Jason's point, though, we don't talk about the institutionalizing. We have gotten rid of institutionalizing the mentally ill. That's something that certainly in this case, we can see that police had been to his house twice, that he had not only threatened himself, he had not only threatened to commit suicide, he had threatened to kill other people. They took weapons. The police visited his home and took weapons out of his home. Now, that is certainly someone who also displayed other evidence of being mentally ill. And I think in a past age, that's somebody who very well might have been institutionalized, and they would have taken a hard look at going, how do we medicate someone like this? How do we provide some sort of mental care for them? But we didn't see that in this case because, as Jason brought up, we don't treat mental illness that way anymore. We have done away with processes by which we institutionalize the mentally ill.
But I don't even think that he was necessarily categorized as being mentally ill. So I don't think that you can institutionalize somebody who hadn't even been categorized as being such.
Well, what they looked at was they said he had threatened other people, he had threatened himself. So certainly he was someone who, and they took a cache of weapons out of his home. The police did on a previous event. So that's certainly a moment where they could have evaluated him, and we know that they didn't.
Yeah.
But you also have to talk about the role of his parents.
It's so hard.
The fact that his parents
situations where we can
ID card, despite the fact that he had allegedly threatened them with knives and beforehand threatened to kill them with knives. And the fact that the parents did not, again, I'm assuming this as the facts are coming out, that's a red flag. If your son is threatening to kill you with knives and you still sponsor their firearm ID card, that's a problem as well. And so I think the problem is on multiple levels.
Yeah, certainly, and there's certainly problems on multiple levels here. We know that there are 7 families who have lost loved ones and countless lives that are forever impacted. Panel, that was an excellent discussion. I knew this was one that we could continue talking about, honestly, through the rest of the hour. But we have other topics we want to get to, so we're going to table that for now. But still to come, and this is breaking within just the past few minutes, NewsNation has learned today President Biden has called the family of an American who has been detained in Russia for years, at least 4 years. The president now saying he is committed to getting Paul Whelan home. Next, our roundtable will discuss the Americans detained in Russia and whether the U.S. is doing enough to get them back home.